Well, this week, the US Federal Reserve does hand down its first interest rate decision of the year, and that's ahead of the Reserve Bank's first decision, which will be next week, with expectations of a further rate rise. Last week, after inflation jumped to 7.8%, economist Warren Hogan told us here that the Reserve Bank will consider resuming 0.5% rate rises. The independent economist and consultant to small business lender Judo Bank joins me now. Warren, there's a few elements to this, but can first off we unpack the AAA credit rating assigned to Australia. I notice the Treasurer has come out with a statement saying this reaffirms the policies that the Albanese government brought out in its first budget, and they'll continue with those in a second. He's also had his new manifesto, his essay that he's published over the weekend, saying he wants a different form of economy. How do you wrap all of that together?
Well, you've got to give the Treasurer some credit for transparency and giving us a vision. I haven't read the article yet, so I can't say too much, but I will be on to that in the next 24 hours. Look, the credit rating's a great news story for Australia, and it reflects the fact that our government finances right now are in good shape. It's interesting that the credit ratings agency didn't make much of the fact we're not forecasting a budget balance at any stage in the next 10 years. That's the first time that's ever happened in modern history. So, look, I think they've got some confidence that the government will come up with a plan. And, of course, the economy's strong and we're benefiting from the global environment and we've got a stable banking system.
But the impact of that very strong economy, full employment, is that you've got inflation. And that inflation means you've got higher interest rates. So the impost on the community, on business, is growing as those rates rise.
Yeah, I mean, this is the negative consequence at the moment of a robust economy that's growing is we've got a global inflation problem. We've got very tight labour markets, and I think the theme as we come into the start now of 2023 is that the RBA's got to get on with it. They've got a lot more work to do, probably more work than other central banks, because it's not a case of our economy being weaker than other economies. You can see from this chart, our interest rates are lower. And then when the Fed, even if they only go 25 basis points this week, their short-term rate will be 4.75. The Bank of Canada last week hiked 4.50. We're at 3.1.
So this is the reason why you're saying that maybe there's an argument for the Reserve Bank to go for 0.5% rate rise to try and play a bit of catch-up with those global markets and a bit of catch-up with our inflation. Exactly.
I mean, the economic environment here is as good, if not better, than what we're seeing in these other markets. And the question is, why then would we be able to get away with lower rates?
Because then you can have a look at where inflation is around the Western world right now. So if we bring up the next chart you've got here, it really is quite stark in terms of where we are. We are the green line at the very top, so just behind Spain. You can see the United States. You can see where Switzerland is, where Japan is, where South Korea is, Singapore. You know, they're all elevated in terms of where they have been. But Australia quite clearly has got a current inflation problem.
It does. And the case for our rates being lower than other countries is weak. Our inflation's higher and, the AAA confirmed that, our government finances are in good shape and our domestic economic momentum is doing pretty well. Yes, we've slowed down, but last year was one of the strongest rates of economic growth we've seen in this country. Employment of 5%, hours worked of 5.5%. We reached the highest level ever annual growth of full-time employment in Australia's modern history last year. So, of course, it had to slow. The question is it slowing enough? And I'd argue 3% cash rate is not enough. And what we're seeing overseas is that rate might have to get to 5%. No one in Australia is talking that number.
Nobody's talking about that. Most people are talking 3.8, 3.85% as a peak.
And that's where the Fed's going right now. That's where the Bank of Canada's going. And the point is, the RBA's got their best chance of executing a soft landing, a rough landing, but avoiding a recession if they get on with it. And I think, the pivot last year gave people a chance to see what was going on, adjust. But now I think they have to get on with it. I think a 50 makes sense to me next week.
And even that rating today from S&P Global Ratings saying AAA credit rating, no recession coming, terms of trade improving, employment's going to remain strong. That shows that Australia may have the capacity to absorb more interest rate rises.
Well, I think that's the case, very much so, without creating a deep downturn in the economy. But it also highlights that it's going to be, it's a long shot that we're going to get rid of this inflation. And if this inflation is not just a nuisance, it is affecting people in our community right now.
OK, so we can have a look at that by looking at some charts that Judo Bank, and you prepared for them. And so in this particular case, what you've got is the services industry, which is the key one when it comes to inflation. And what this really shows is, you can see with the blue line, the level of business activity is declining rapidly. And that's the fundamental problem here, isn't it?
We've had a slowdown in the services sector, much welcome from unsustainably strong rates of growth. It's improved in the flash report in January, but if you look at the employment numbers, they're still expanding, and that demand for labour is still strong. That's where the inflation pressure is going to come from, via the labour market, via wages. So it's too early to be calling the end of this rate hiking cycle. And if anything, I think the issue is that they need to up the ante in the next couple of meetings.
Tell you what, Warren Hogan, thank you so much for the input. We shall talk to you very, very shortly. Warren Hogan there.